I'm Sam.
And I'm Jackson. And this is Your Press Release.
Welcome to this week's episode of Your Press Release. And this week we've got a very special guest. It's a business consultant in the healthcare field. That's a specialization named Bob Spiel. Bob is a personal friend of both Jackson and I, and we're very happy to have him on today. He's the author of the book Flip Your Focus. And he was a consultant for a long time, started in some large business, and then actually went on to begin his own consultancy. And so we're going to ask him about quite a bit of some interesting things today that we think are going to be a lot of fun. And we also, right before we started this, Bob had a fun little story that he wanted to begin with. So how about you add a little bit to your intro with that?
You bet, Sam. I am the least likely person that could ever have been sitting in this chair. All right, talking about being an entrepreneur. In business school, they had us, they didn't have us, but I took an entrepreneurial class, all right, the fourth semester of my business career there at BYU. And they had us take a survey, and the survey was, how likely are you to be an entrepreneur, and how good would you be at being an entrepreneur? And I scored like in the bottom fourth of the whole class. So, for about 25 years of my career, I've got this brand on my forehead that says, nope, you can't do this. Nope, you're not an entrepreneur. Nope, you've got to work for somebody else. Okay? And just to fast forward, I had a wonderful career, but I found in about, I'd say 20 years ago, that I ran into a situation where I suddenly realized that I couldn't work for people. I can work with people really well, and as a consultant, I do that all day long. But I discovered that I couldn't work for people because I got fired, you guys, 3 times in a row. Okay? 3 senior level positions. Bam, bam, bam. And boy, you talk about a shock to your system, a shock to your family, and a shock to your wife. That's a pretty tough row to hoe, Luckily, I have a son, Adam, who's my oldest son, and he is a serial entrepreneur. He saw his dad struggle through corporate jobs for the early part of my career and said, I'm never going to go in that direction. And luckily, he saw that, because about the time that I started looking for my next CEO gig, all right, he said to me, Dad, why don't you go work for yourself? And you know what my reply to him was? I can't do that. That's not me. So another month evolves, and I'm still looking for another CEO position in healthcare. And he says, Dad, have you thought much about what I told you? And I said, a little, but Adam, that's not me. I can't work for myself. And he looked at me and said, yes, you can. And I said, how do you know that, Adam? And he said, Dad, because you're an independent thinker. So I kind of packed that one away, and I thought, okay, what does that mean? So I'm still looking for jobs, because there's this frame of reference in my head about I have to work for somebody else, all right? He finally came to me one more time and said, Dad, have you thought more about it? And I said, yes, Adam, but I just don't think I can do that. And he said, listen, I want you to understand something, that if you can find the intersection of your knowledge, your experience, and your passion, that's your sweet spot. And if you stay there and play there, you no longer have a job, you have a calling, and money finds you. And I want that thought to land, because I can now tell you 20 years after that conversation that he was right on every count.
Can I just ask real quick, how old was your son when he gave you this advice?
Your age? 25? Yeah.
It seems a little backwards.
It is completely backwards, And to me, it was like one of those Yoda and Luke Skywalker moments when all of a sudden everything aligned. It's like, okay, because in my mind, I kept thinking about, man, I know there were times in my career where I succeeded wildly in things that I was doing, and then all of a sudden, boom, 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 these 3 positions, and they all ended in flames. And what was the difference? And it dawned on me, I can work with people, but these positions that I had, I was working for people. Okay. And there's a whole nuance behind that as well with like my book, Flip Your Focus. And so the thought was, well, man, if I get into consulting, I work for people all the time, but I'm really working with people, okay? Because I'm part of their answer team. I'm not part of their chain of command.
Mm-hmm.
And I started getting these requests from doctors in particular because I'd been a hospital and surgical center CEO and had turned a practice around, or those entities around, and they'd heard that I was looking for work, but they were just calling me up saying, you got some time? I've got a problem, and I'll pay you. And I'm like going, wow, this is really cool.
Mm-hmm.
While I'm looking for my real job, okay? And then it started getting bigger and bigger and bigger until I reached the point of, I want to do this. This makes a lot of sense.
So you kind of created your own job.
I did create my own job, yes. Absolutely.
And when did it kind of dawn on you that you were onto something that could blossom into a larger company or into your career?
Mm-hmm. Honestly, Sam, it was when I realized that I couldn't go back to what I had been and where I had been. It was almost like God was kicking me with cowboy boots through this next door saying, you're not going back, bud. Okay. And I had fun with it. And I think that was one of the biggest things, was suddenly I felt free and engaged. And it's still the same today. I mean, I've been doing this now for roughly 18 years. And most days don't feel like work. Even though I work harder as an entrepreneur now than I ever did working for somebody else. Although I worked hard there too. But most days don't feel like work, because when you're in alignment with who you are and the gifts that you've been given, a lot of it's joy. Like Adam said, you no longer have a job, you have a calling. And that's true, that I have found my calling. And it's wonderful, because the calling for me is to really help business leaders learn how to run their businesses and lead their teams. And when the light bulbs start to go off in their brains and they start to realize what they haven't known, but ways that they can approach leading and managing that suddenly free up their time and help them find their calling even more, it's awesome. It's fun.
Did you, before you did venture into doing your own thing, did you get glimpses of that freedom that you kind of talked about before, in a way that made you say, how do I get more of this? Or was it something that was totally new to you when you started doing it?
That's a great question, Jackson. I don't think so. I really don't think I did. I mean, I flirted with the idea of consulting a couple of times, and I backed away from it because I knew that it meant time on the road in particular. And so kind of steered and veered away and said, okay, I'm going to, keep working for the man, so to speak. But it wasn't really until I really got in alignment with my gifts and really what God presented to me that joy started to show up. And it was pretty instant, really.
Okay.
So we've mentioned that alignment multiple times of
Yes,
knowledge, experience,
and
passion, which
yeah.
is a pretty amazing takeaway. So how did you go about realizing that? Like, what actually made you put that together to create this opportunity of yours?
Well, I'll tell you, I'll answer that in a second, Sam, but I'll tell you the last bridge that I had to cross.
Okay.
And that was this thought of, okay, I think I want to try this. What if I fail? And that was the last big piece that Adam cemented in my brain. And he said, Dad, here's this book by Napoleon Hill, the guy who wrote Think and Grow Rich. I mean, kind of the godfather of this whole self-improvement idea within business. And it was called Outwitting the Devil. Fascinating book that was actually published like 50 years after his death, because later on some of the things he postulates are kind of controversial.
This is one of my favorite books that you had me read, and actually
Yeah.
loved it.
It's a fantastic book, And it was just so clear, the message don't fear failure. Because on the other side of failure is this gift inside that then allows you to find true success. You know, after all the men and women that he interviewed within his career that had all really experienced profound failure before they found profound success. So it's like, okay, go for it. Do it. And then the most fascinating thing happened was once I got into alignment, it was almost like the universe had been waiting to put all these things in my path that had been set up, but I had to be ready for them. Okay? The last piece that put into place really was an article by this World Bank economist, fascinating guy, who wrote some articles about creativity, innate creativity within each one of us. One is called A Guide to Liberating Your Soul, okay? And he talked about how within us we have these two elements, our ego and our soul. And the soul itself is crying out for purpose. But simultaneously, the ego is crying out for position and power and praise and all the things the world, kind of presents to you. And when you pursue that side of it, the soul gets quieter and quieter and quieter, but it never truly goes away. But his point was, the moment you begin to embrace the calling of your soul, that's the moment that the universe opens up all the possibilities that have already been there. So that's what happened to me in figuring out what was the intersection of my knowledge, experience, and passion. I was introduced to somebody else who became a great mentor. I work primarily in the dental industry just because it's a really cool place to play. And I love the problems that it has because I like solving them. And I got introduced to the friend of a friend, and he was a dental consultant, and he just kind of helped open up my understanding of the industry. So it's really important to get a mentor as you jump into something, especially something new. And from there, it was just more and more opportunities that came along of people that were just there at the right time to provide the next stage of learning. But I looked back, Sam, to answer your question, how did I know what the intersection was? I had to look back at where I had succeeded before. And what were the elements of that success? What made that so good? And then have to then pose the question, okay, how can I replicate that? All right, where can I create that environment so that can happen consistently?
And so how different was jumping into the realm of dental from the healthcare you were in? Because you said you had to learn a lot and you had to find a lot of people who could walk you through that. How big of a jump was this for you?
It's funny, Jackson, but business is business, kind of. The common denominators are all kind of the same. Every industry has its own nuances and its own kind of processes and sales cycle and pinch points. But if you're familiar enough with looking for them, I mean, it was a challenge, and I read voraciously. I went to conferences voraciously. I listened to CDs and tapes and all these other things from really smart people just to start to put it all together. But once it all came together, it's kind of like, this is really kind of simple. And it's kind of like what Bruce Hafen talks about, how there's this point of simplicity. Then you work through complexity. But then on the other side of complexity, you find simplicity again. Okay? And I think that's kind of the process you go through as you gain more experience within an industry, that all of a sudden the complexity becomes really, I don't want to say basic because none of it's basic,
right,
but it becomes clear. Okay?
And do you think that's there for all industries?
Yeah, I do. Absolutely. Yeah.
So then how did you go about picking the dental industry specifically?
It picked me. Really, Sam, it picked me.
How is that? Like, elaborate a little bit on that.
Well, okay, just to tell you, You know, a friend of a friend introduced me to a guy named Larry Winterstein who'd been a dental consultant for 35 years. And Larry had expressed to him that he wanted to kind of sell his business and kind of fade out a little bit. I didn't buy his business, but instead he mentored me for a couple of years. And the very first on-site visit that I did with him, just to kick the tires, see if this even felt like something that I really wanted to do, was at a practice in Boise, Idaho. And because at first my thought was, dentistry? Really? I mean, teeth? You know, what's the big deal? But Larry, in that just 2 days, really opened my brain to what this whole industry was about. And that, yeah, teeth are a component of it, but it has all these really cool elements of leadership and teamwork and human systems and communication and ultimately love and fear. Because dentistry is a really intimate experience for all of us. Mm-hmm. And once he opened that up to my view, it's kind of like, this is really cool. I can play here. Because I looked back on my successes and said, you know what? I've built some really great teams in the past. Big teams. Teams of 400 people that were at the very top of their scale in our industry. And I loved leadership because of my first mentor was actually mentored by Stephen Covey. And he taught us so much about leadership when I was your age. And so I thought, okay, it's got leadership, it's got team building. I love communication. I'm system driven in terms of finding solutions. And the biggest thing to me, that you may not know this, just being a patient, but dentistry is really a very emotional sales cycle. And there's a lot of emotion in terms of the delivery of it. And that appealed to me because I just love that part of the heart. So it all fit. And it was like, you know, again, God just kicked me through the door with cowboy boots. Said, here you go. And I thought, okay, great, let's do it. And I did it. And it's been a blast, really. You know, there have been stumbles along the way and lessons and a few times that I've messed up, and you learn from it and you go on. But it's great when you can find something that you love, that you're good at, that also solves people's problems, and that they're willing to pay you to solve those problems.
Seems to be the last piece of the puzzle there.
That is the last piece of the puzzle. That's exactly right.
But you did say that would find you if you could meet that intersection, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
When did it start to find you?
Very quickly, Jackson. Yeah. Just again, being led to people who knew people who then referred me to dentists. And then meeting them, and it almost got to the point where, I mean, candidly, I mean, I've got a website, but I haven't marketed for 10 years. And it's all word of mouth.
That's pretty amazing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, we are marketing now because I spun another business off of my main business 2 years ago, and we really want to scale that thing because we think it's got a critical mission inside the future of dentistry. But for my, what I call practice management business, I stopped marketing 10 years ago, and people just found me.
That's so cool. What are some of the different problems that you've been able to solve for people? Like maybe some of, like, let's say, what's been your favorite project for dental practice management that you've been able to do?
Wow. Like I said, leadership and teamwork are really key components. A dental practice that has a great leader and a really effective team plays at an entire different level than any other practice out there. Okay, as a good friend of mine, Catherine Eitel-Belt, put it once, she said, it's the hidden game of dentistry, that when a patient walks into that practice, they don't know why, but it really feels good, and they can sense that this team has great harmony and just a really good flow, okay? And a practice owner who loves what he's doing or she's doing and is relaxed. So my favorite project, Sam, is to find that dentist who has succeeded in spite of him or herself. They've been at the game maybe 5 or 10 years. Patients like him. they have quality, but they've painted themselves into a corner because they don't understand the game of dentistry. The way I heard somebody put it was that dental school can teach you how to throw the ball, but it doesn't teach you how to play the game. And there are a lot of industries where that's true. Okay, school can teach you how to throw the ball, but there's a hidden game that you have to find and discover, and there are people that know that game that you've got to get in, connection with. So I love to teach them the hidden game and then begin to see, in particular, the freedom that starts to create within a dentist's mind. Because it's really kind of a grueling industry. It's a full contact sport. You are spiritually, physically, emotionally, and mentally challenged all day long, working in a very confined space and in a glass house where everybody can see what you're doing and everybody can hear what you're doing. So it's stressful, all right? And if you feel as a dental practice owner like it's all on you, then that weight just becomes almost unbearable. It's almost like a story I heard from a good friend of mine once, that a dental practice kind of resembles a little red wagon that I had as a little boy, all right? And I'd carry stuff around the neighborhood or around my backyard in this little red wagon. And Linda Miles, who was a great friend and still is, been a longtime consultant, said, most dental practices look like that, and the team is all in the little red wagon, and the practice owner is pulling them and getting exhausted by doing so.
Oh boy.
Okay? What I love to do is teach a team and a practice leader how to change that whole dynamic so that it's no longer the dentist pulling the wagon, but the dentist is in the wagon steering, and the team is all around the wagon pushing. It's so much easier for everybody. It's so much more fun for everybody. And the coolest thing is, at least for me, is to start to see that their enjoyment goes up dramatically and work becomes easier. They're still doing the same stuff, but work becomes easier. So that's my reward, okay?
How incredible. So then let's dissect that a little bit. What are some of the processes that help the team work as one or to make the work easier that might be applicable into a more general
in any
business
setting,
sense? Yeah.
absolutely in any setting. I mean, to me, the gauge of teamwork really boils down to one question, and it's who needs me now? I wrote a book a few years ago called Flip Your Focus, and it's on this concept called upside down leadership that I really was taught by Jim Faber, who was my first mentor, and then I saw in practice by other leaders like Dennis Webb at Franklin Covey and some other places that I've been. And the whole idea of upside down leadership is that as a leader, my job is to see that my team succeeds. Okay? Where the traditional model is kind of the military model where everybody's there to see that the leader succeeds. All right, I think Jeff Bezos could probably claim that that's his whole mantra is everybody in Amazon, all these peons underneath me are here to see that I succeed, that I get to fly around the world in a jet and I get to have $1 billion yacht. They've really made me succeed. Okay. And that may be management, but leadership is the exact opposite, is to see that his team succeeds. And when a leader adopts that mindset, then it changes everything that they do in terms of how they approach their team and what takes place. Okay? So, to ask the question, what are some of the systems that take place and how could this be used elsewhere? A team that is led by a leader who understands their role, then they become leaders as well. And then that leadership is exhibited by looking out for the people on either side of them. Okay, and when that happens, I call it the unselfish organization. Magic happens. You take that team, I don't care what industry you plug them into or what environment they can be in, they will succeed because they're in it for each other. So let me say just a little bit more.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm a big believer that part of business needs to be to make work predictable for the next person in line. because when you do that, that person can then lean into their position and be at their best. And you know, it's the corporate model of just throw stuff over the wall, okay, and hope you catch it, because it ain't my job. You know, I've done mine. And instead of breaking down all those walls and making it a very integrated, fluid process, so that everybody knows who's next in line and they're really your customer, and you make it predictable for them, which makes it easier for them, and then it just keeps passing on down the line. And everybody then can lean in and do their best. And that's part of what I do in dentistry is how do we teach the team to make work predictable for the next person in line?
So if I'm understanding this correctly, you are able to break down the barriers, you make it simple, you make it predictable, and then you empower each member of the team to become a leader so that they're not only thinking about themselves but trying to help all their coworkers succeed as one.
Yes.
So they look at their job. This isn't my job. This team as a unit collectively is what we're working towards
correct.
helping.
Yep.
Okay, that's cool.
Yeah.
How do you get to that point? Because I would imagine if you can get a few on board, it'll become very contagious. But how do you convince that first person? I would assume it'd be the leader of the practice.
It is the leader, because you can't run faster than your leader.
Right. But
Yes.
so how do you get them on board?
You know, it's surprising, Jackson, that it's not as hard as it sounds. All right? We're hierarchical beings, and so we look up all the time to whatever leader or leaders are, I hate to use the phrase, but over us. And so I've learned that you can't run faster than your leader. You can't fly higher than your leader. That seems to be one of those unwritten laws of life. So it starts with the leader to then begin to adopt this mindset. Instead of it's all about me, it's all about them. And what can I do to help them succeed? How can they get the training and the tools and the targets so that they know what they can do? From that, part of it is allowing the leader to learn how to release control without losing control. Okay? Too many, especially entrepreneurs like we're talking about in this podcast, they start into a business and they succeed because they're really great doers. They're great chief everything officers. And yet one of the things that they really struggle with is starting to let go and give things to other people. I mean, we've all heard the stories of, you know, that founder that basically has to be kicked out to allow the team to blossom and grow because they just won't let go. Okay? So once you, however, as a leader, start to realize that your team actually knows what's going on and giving them the tools to problem solve, it's fascinating how quickly a team can start to engage at the proper level of taking ownership and being leaders. Most leaders just have never given their team the opportunity to actually see them plug into that way. But once they see it, they'll never go back to the old way because it's too much fun for them and it's also very freeing.
I think that this is such a cool principle because basically what I'm hearing is that as a leader, you want to help and empower other people and let them do the job so they can do it and do it in the very best way that they can, which will allow them maximum personal growth. And they'll also have more satisfaction in their work.
They will. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've seen it in a few different places that I've worked in where the leaders won't give up that control and how constricted it feels and how like demotivating it is to kind of work in that environment.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I can also attest to the opposite of I've worked under people that were extremely empowering and gave me a lot of leeway to use my skills and my creativity to come up with solutions. It was probably the most fun that I've ever had working. So I can just attest that what you're saying, it works.
It does.
It's very effective.
It does. Yeah. So Jackson, like in the environment that I'm in, what do I do to try to help create that paradigm shift? Because that's literally what it is, both from the leader as well as from the team. Working specifically with the leaders to help them adopt this new way of thinking all right, doing a lot of coaching and a lot of discovery. But then with the teams, I like to play games. Okay, which sounds really weird. But I found that adults learn best when they're on their feet and when they're doing something that's fun. And so I've picked up from, other consultants that I've worked with and training that I've been to, some certain key games that we use along the process or the pathway of helping a team become more empowered that teach really critical principles that we want them to be able to discover. Because it's a weird thing, you guys, about adults. We fight most of the things that are given to us in terms of ideas, but something that we discover on our own, we will almost defend to the death.
Yeah, it's definitely me.
Okay.
I think it's all of us.
It's all of us. It's just this innate peace within us. And so part of my job then as a consultant is to ask, okay, how can I create those discovery moments? It's almost like, again, a good friend who once said, how can I not tell them? Because as a consultant, you can walk into this really, really ineffective model of saying, here's my playbook. Okay, here's my book. Read it, follow it. Thanks for the money. I'm out of here. Which doesn't work. All right, doesn't align, doesn't create passion. It's like saying, Sam, I know, or excuse me, Jackson, you're a great cook. All right. And yet you're going to probably improvise with the things that you do as far as cooking goes. You'll have a cookbook, but you're going to then discover your own flair and figure out how to do things different and better, right? In consulting, too often we hand a cookbook and say, just follow my recipe, and I promise you it'll work. Instead of taking this approach of every business is different, every practice is different, how can we, instead of a cookbook, give them a guidebook? Okay, that then has the principles that they need and also establishes the discovery moments. Because once we discover something, that's when we own it. And once we own it, the likelihood of doing it goes up 1,000%. Covey said years ago, no ownership or no participation, no buy-in. Okay, and I think that's really true.
Yeah. And you said with the leader, it's a lot of individual one-on-one coaching, helping them see that picture. I have to imagine that most of these people are at least somewhat open to that because they're hiring you and bringing you in and asking you to come in and help them with their business.
Correct.
How often are you running across times where people ask you to do that and then are pretty close-minded to what you're trying to open their eyes to?
Well, understand that as a consultant, you're grabbing a subset of the population that are wanting change. Okay. I heard from somebody long ago, I forget who, that there's this pathway that we as humans take, and that is that we will accept change when we think or finally perceive that the path of staying the same is going to create more pain than the path of change. Okay? So that's a really sacred moment because that's a moment of humility. So if they're in pain and they're in profound pain, they will be open. But if they just picked you up because they think that you can magically transform their business, but they're not committed to making any personal change themselves, it doesn't work. And I've had that happen maybe 10% of the time. But most of the time when somebody seeks you out, it's because they really are wanting to do something different because they realize I'm at a plateau and I don't know how to get off it. But I know there's more. I just don't know how to get it.
What did you do for those clients that you found weren't exactly a perfect fit?
You fire them?
You fired your client.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah.
So how did that go? Like,
Well,
walk me
okay,
through.
Sam, it's real easy. As a consultant, you just have to ask yourself this question. Who gives you energy and who sucks energy out of you? All right? And if they're an energy giver, that's a good client. If they're an energy sucker, fire them. You do it gracefully and kindly. Always want to preserve people's, goodwill, and you don't, nothing mean about it, but you just say, you know what? It just doesn't feel like it's a fit.
How in other settings could you apply something like that? Because not everyone's going to come in and be the consultant.
Correct.
And be able to say, all right, I'm walking away. A lot of times people who are trying to make a career for themselves, whether they're entrepreneurs or entering the corporate world, are going to be placed in situations where they're working with people who do suck the energy out. How do they overcome that and create that barrier where they can keep giving themselves energy and move forward?
Yeah. Well, it reminds me of one of the things my dad taught me. He said, Bob, you can learn as much from a bad leader as you can from a good leader. And I think that's true. But you don't want to stay with a bad leader very long. But you can learn a ton. But how do you preserve that energy that you need to bring to that? It really boils down to, what do you do personally to sharpen the saw? How do you infuse energy into your heart and soul so that you can show up your best? And everybody's got a different answer for that. But I loved what Stephen Covey wrote in his book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, about the whole habit of sharpening the saw and making sure that you put gas in your gas tank so that you can show up your best.
Can you just give some brief examples of what that would look like?
Yeah. I'll just tell you for me.
Yeah.
I mean, exercise is an awesome way to sharpen our saw. Not overdoing it, but just enough cardio and exercise like that just allows you to flush negative energy out of your body. Great music is another way. Great literature is another way. For me, reading the scriptures is something that I try to do every day to be able to just put energy back inside my soul. I love to read history, which I know history has this kind of,
I love history.
Sam, I got a book for you, man.
Perfect.
Okay.
We'll talk after.
Yeah, we will. I just love history because I love to see how people solve their problems. It's fascinating. So much more fun than fiction. Because these are real people that encountered real issues, that faced real life and death, and yet did something about it that required courage. So that's another way that I replenish myself. And then just having fun. There's a phrase of recreation, and that literally means the process of recreating. So skiing, backpacking, hiking, boating, but it's different than amusement. And I think there's a misalignment perhaps in our society today. There's an awful lot of amusement that goes on, but not a lot of recreation. Would you like to know what amusement?
Yeah, I was going to say, what would the difference
tell us
be?
what you mean here.
Okay, the word amusement literally means I'm trying to think of the exact root. It is something that is meant to deceive.
I kind of want to look it up.
Yeah, look it up. Okay. Amusement, I mean, you just think about like in an amusement park, with those funky mirrors that would make you look all distorted and stuff. All right. That's what I think of when I think of the word amusement.
Interesting.
And there is a lot of amusement that happens, but I'll just, for example, video games, all right, or movies or different things like that just create this sense of disengagement for a while, but it's kind of like eating pork rinds, hoping you're going to get really good nutrition. In the end, you feel drained. Okay, sharpening the saw gives you energy. When you're done with that, whatever it is, whenever, based upon you, whenever you're done with it, you feel infused with energy and not drained.
Yeah, I looked up the etymology of it, and it's from 17th century France, and it's in the sense of musing or being a diversion to the attention.
Okay.
So pulling your focus from what's important,
Yeah.
it sounds like,
Yeah.
which would explain a lot of the current culture.
Yeah. So I think social media is amusement.
Sounds like a distraction.
Very, very much a distraction. Yeah.
And how did you define it again?
Whatever gives you energy.
Amusement.
Oh, something that is meant to deceive.
Meant to deceive.
And then we want to replace that with recreation.
Exactly.
With the root of
Recreation.
You're recreating.
You're recreating.
Your own energy.
You are.
Okay.
Exactly. Yeah.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
So, what what I'm hearing from a lot of these different things we're talking about here is that we need to flip our focus, to use the title of your book, towards what brings you energy and vitality, not only in your personal life, but also in your business. Like we mentioned, talking about the passion in the beginning and the intersection of passion and knowledge and experience. And then right now with sharpening the saw, but then also with the teams of finding other people that can build you up, but then also seeking to build them up and empowering them as a whole. So that kind of seems to be your main message that I'm understanding here. Would you agree with that?
I agree with that, although I will say there's one caveat.
Yeah, go ahead.
That the word passion itself can be misconstrued. There are a lot of people that have spent a lot of money on undergrads and graduate degrees pursuing their passion, and they're broke. Okay?
Yeah.
Remember, it's your intersection of your knowledge, your experience, and your passion. It has to be something that meets real human needs.
That does sound pretty critical.
Yeah, it is.
And so, how did you discover this framework that you're so passionate about and helping people discover, of sharpening the saw, of
Recreation.
Yes, recreation, and getting that energy back? Where did you learn this, and how did you develop that framework and that mindset?
Well, I'll just tell you, if there's one thing and one thing only that I'd want your listeners to go do, go find a book that's about 32 years old called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People and read it.
So it sounds like working for Stephen Covey and adopting those principles into your life was really the foundation for a lot of this.
Well, I didn't work for him. I worked for a guy who was mentored by him.
Oh,
Okay. Jim Faber was my first real mentor when I was your age, and I was actually working in a whole other industry in production agriculture in California. Crazy, that I've gone from ag all the way to healthcare. But Jim was an incredible teacher, a fantastic leader, and he had adopted Covey's principles, and he taught them to us all the time and had us teach each other all the time. But the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People came out in about 1992. And it's not meant for today's audience, to be candid with you. It isn't 10-second sound bites and social media worthy. All right, it's pithy. Yep. It's thick. It's like deciding you're going to jump into Lord of the Rings. All right, and say
good book.
Yeah, but say I know this is going to be an experience, but it wasn't written for 2024. But that doesn't mean that it's not great, because it is. And his principles were so spot on in terms of just teaching concepts like be proactive and begin with the end in mind and do first things first. And then strive for win-win. Okay, seek first to understand and then be understood, and create synergy, and then sharpen the saw. Those became a framework for me that I've hung on to my whole career. And they have been invaluable because they've allowed me to see how I show up better, and also what the real goal is. So anyway, that's one thing I would recommend. That's where this framework came from. And then from great mentors along the road that were kind enough to share some really salient lessons, and then getting beat up by doing the wrong things. Okay? Because experience is what happens when you're hoping for something different. Okay? But it's the best teacher.
And let's just talk about that briefly, because that is one of the segments of your framework, the experience one. And I think a lot of people would be wondering, what is the best way to get experience, especially to be an entrepreneur? Because most of the time, you don't really start with experience. You just go start your first company.
That's correct, yeah.
But instead, you went out and worked for other companies first to get experience.
Yes.
So how would you recommend going about to get experience in the first place?
One of the coolest things about today is that there is so much vicarious experience that you can find if you find the right channels. Podcasts and videos and TED Talks and different things like that I really think gives the young entrepreneur today so much of an edge compared to my generation, because there's so much more there available. if you'll be intentional with who you're listening to and what it is that they have to say. So that's the first way you gain experience. You gain it vicariously. Another way you gain experience is, frankly, interview people. All right, talk to people. Go talk to business leaders. I don't know one that is going to close their door and say, nope, sorry, I don't have time for you. Most everybody would love to tell you their story and also tell you about, this is how I got beat up. This is what I did wrong, and here's what I learned from it. And then you just dive into the arena and start to learn. Okay?
Someone I'm close to has made the recommendation to all kinds of people who've come to him and say, what do I do with my life? Because I don't want to go work for someone. He's often thrown out the advice, well, maybe you should go get a job for 2 or 3 years to get some of that experience, really understand the industry you're trying to get in, and then jump into it.
I agree with that completely.
Okay.
Yes, I do.
Perfect.
Yeah. Yep. Cut your teeth on somebody else's dime. All right? Learn the industry. Learn everything you possibly can and experience what's good and bad about it. Okay? And do it while you're young, when you don't have a lot of expenses, and you can afford to move, you can afford to experience, you can afford to see new things.
Well, we just had some technical difficulties, but we are back. And where we finished before hopping back into this conversation was, we had just been talking about a mentor of mine saying, go get experience doing what you want to do, learn the industry, and then go start something on your own. And to which you agreed. And my follow-up on that, my response was, it seems so contrary to what the younger generations kind of think right now. So many of them, I feel like, want to just jump right in with no knowledge or experience and say, I love this, I can get it done. So I don't know if either of you have anything to add to that, but that was just kind of my thoughts in response to the fact that you agreed with that, is go get experience when possible.
Absolutely. Get experience, get a mentor, and if you want to jump in and dive in, I would suggest dive in with somebody else that you trust, that's been in the industry for a while and knows the ropes and can teach you the ropes, because there's an awful lot that is not obvious.
And that's a little bit about what you've done, as well as in the sense that you've served as a mentor to your business partner who didn't have any experience but jumped into the dental field, right?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Cool.
Perfect.
Well, how about we jump into a little bit about culture, because that's one of your specialties. In fact, you're known as Mr. Team, and you have a 90% success rate of putting together teams that work well together. So what are some of the secrets to creating a good company culture?
Well, it's actually really simple. Culture is a direct reflection of the leader or leaders. Like I said earlier, we're hierarchical beings. We look up to the top. And within a small business especially, the culture of an organization is really a derivative of the leader's ways of doing things, their way of leading, and their just kind of standards, okay? So one of the great ways to be able to actually, from my profession, to coach a leader about their leadership is just hold up a mirror and say, what do you love about your culture and what do you hate? And then you just flip that around in terms of how are you contributing to both of these, what you love and what you hate, and how can we do less of what you hate and a lot more of what you love? That's the biggest secret that I found. Okay, it starts at the top.
Is it ever justifiable to bring in the team and say, what do you love about the culture? What do you hate about the culture?
There's nothing wrong with doing that. Absolutely. In fact, I do that is with one of my businesses, just trying to really put our thumb on what the culture's like, to be able to find the right person to bring into it as an associate dentist. So their feedback can be really valuable. Question is, will they listen to the feedback?
Right.
All right.
Is there like one specific culture that you find to be the best in terms of business, or are there multiple cultures that can breed success?
That's a great question. Wow, one best culture. If you really, as an entrepreneur, I would suggest 2 books in addition to 7 Habits to really gauge and gain a clear understanding of both what it means to lead and then what the mechanisms are to be able to create a really effective entrepreneurial culture. One of the books I would mention is mine, Flip Your Focus. You can get on Amazon. It's also on Audible. And the other is a book called Traction by Gino Wickman. Gino put together a thing called the entrepreneurial operating system. And I don't remember the whole story about him, but I know he's kind of a serial entrepreneur raised by a dad who's a serial entrepreneur. And he just put his system together into a very clear written format in terms of how a company can literally go from nothing to something, okay, and become highly relevant using his kind of systematic ways of not just establishing a culture, but allowing a culture to actually thrive with a high degree of independence, with a lot of direction and strategy, with a lot of feedback coming, so that everybody is engaged in creating and not just the leader themselves. So those are two things that I would recommend.
Yeah. And I've not read Traction, but I have read your book, Flip Your Focus. And I just want to let whoever's listening know, like, it's a very easy read, but is extremely enlightening at the same time, which I feel like is not often the case. But because of how simple and clearly you put things, it's very easy to understand what a leader needs to come in and do in order to create that culture, at least from my own experience in reading the book.
Great. I'm glad that resonated with you, Jackson.
Yeah, it was fantastic. I read it as well, and the big part for me was just that the book dialed in to empower the people around you, which is kind of what we talked about in the beginning. And then as you empower other people, that they also will then begin to take more responsibility and truly, I would say, invest personally in the business to create better outcomes than probably you could do as a leader. And they're going to do it in their own way.
They will.
It's going to be incredible.
Absolutely.
So to wrap things up, if there was to be a press release written about your career or your life that clearly defined or demonstrated that you were successful, what would that say? What would you want it to say?
Hence the name of your podcast.
Exactly.
That's a fantastic question. While I'm thinking about that, let me tell you a quick story, and then I'll give you an answer for me. My great-grandfather was a very, very successful entrepreneur back 100 years ago. Okay. Very Christian man, very honest man, and when it was getting toward the end of his life, his wife, my great-grandmother, said, "What would you like on your tombstone?" And he said, I don't know. And she said, she started listing all these great attributes about him, okay? And he said, no. Just right. He loved children. And that's what's on his tombstone, is he loved children. For me, man, on my what I would want written about me was that I tried to practice Christian leadership and management and teach it to those around me so that they can empower others and help them find things about themselves that they never knew, and then keep the process going. You know, leaders create other leaders is one of the rules of life that I have found. I've also found that leaders don't blame, leaders solve. And so just to really try to frame it in that way, that's how I would want my legacy in business to be remembered.
I love it.
That's incredible. Thank you so much for sharing what you want to do. And I find that is a perfect summation of everything we've talked about today, of being a Christian leader. Is there anything that you're hoping to do next as you go forward to accomplish that goal?
Well, I'd love to write another book, to be honest with you. I think I've got 4 books still walled up inside of me. 3 I'm probably going to write when I'm retired. But one book that I would dearly love to write is called Your Leadership is Killing Your Business.
Sounds like a good book.
Yeah. What a
Okay.
title.
Yeah, well, there's a friend of mine named Chuck Blakeman who wrote a book called Making Money is Killing Your Business, which is a phenomenal book for entrepreneurs. Another friend wrote a book called Your Marketing is Killing Your Business, okay, which I think had a lot of credence to it. But, man, the biggest thing that I have found that either allows a business to soar is whether somebody truly leads or not.
Well, I'll be first in line to read it when it comes out.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And other than that, I mean, it's serving missions and trying to spread good and joy and love around the world and being a grandpa. And, you know,
Yeah.
just trying to spread the love.
Yeah. All wonderful goals.
Yeah.
Sounds pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. Is there any last thing that you would want to leave with our listeners?
Oh, wow. I think you're both phenomenal men.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I really do. I've worked with you both. I know you well. I applaud you for what you're doing. I think this is awesome. And, you know, I guess the last thing that I would say is don't be afraid to make mistakes. Don't be afraid of... You don't have to get it all right first. In fact, you won't. And that's okay. But learn and recreate and figure out again what that intersection is. And then go pursue your dreams and make the world a better place because of it.
I don't think we could possibly add anything to that closing statement.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay,
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. Good to be with you.